Today we're talking about the gift of working of miracles. What exactly is this gift? What is a miracle? Are they still in operation today, or did they die out with the apostles in the Bible? And why is the gift of healing and the gift of miracles listed separately? Why are they different? This and much more on this episode of Faith Bombs. So what is the gift of working of miracles?
Simply put, the gift of miracles, or working of miracles, is a gift given by God to create a miracle in our time and space. So it's God's amazing supernatural ability coming into our natural world and creating something that we couldn't do by ourselves.
Yeah. And we see this gift a lot of times in operation with the gift of faith.
Mm-hmm.
So what exactly is a miracle then?
A miracle is any time or place where God comes in and does something that we cannot create. There is no possibility for it to happen in our realm. So in other words, it's an event that takes place that's miraculous, that no one could explain other than to acknowledge that it was God himself.
She likes to use the word itself within the definition. So it goes against, so to speak, the norm of the universe. It would be something, there's no natural explanation for a miracle.
Right.
You cannot explain this away. And we'll get into that. It's supernatural. It's a God-given ability through the Holy Spirit that can only testify to the God of the Bible.
Okay, so how does the gift of healing or healing differ from the working of miracles or miracles themselves?
So healing is God's supernatural healing power over sickness and disease without natural means. Okay. So in other words, it could possibly be done by natural means, but God just go ahead and does it. So like pain leaving your body, a damaged lung being healed, birth defects being healed, etc. A miracle is beyond the natural realm. It is so supernatural that it is beyond natural, if that makes any sense. So a miracle is something that's in the natural realm, but beyond, it had to come from someplace beyond the natural realm. I would say things like legs growing out. That's a miracle. Like there's no way that medically you can explain how a person's leg grew 1.5 inches, which we have seen happen. New body parts. We'll tell a story about a man who saw that come to pass. Person where they had something removed and it got removed because of something else, and it was no longer there, and then God restored it. A problem with your brain that cannot be fixed, where God just goes in and reworks that. I mean, there's we could go through. It's just changing the natural course of nature as well. You look at things like, well, we could talk about the 10 plagues in Egypt. That is the gift of miracle in operation in the Old Testament.
That's true.
What are the 10 plagues again?
You have the water that turns to blood.
Yep.
You have the frogs that showed up everywhere. Lice. Yuck. That one gets me. Flies. Disease that took out all the livestock. You have boils. That one may be worse than lice. Hail, which killed everything. Locusts, which finished everything off that wasn't killed by hail. You have darkness, and then last you have the death of the firstborn in the house. And
so none of those, all those things, they may have been natural things, but they made no sense to all of them just happen there. Especially, you think about darkness. Darkness covered all of Egypt except for where the Israelites were.
Right.
So again, beyond natural means. Israel crossing over the Red Sea on dry ground.
Yeah.
As a miracle. There's no other way.
That's a super cool miracle.
Joshua commanding the sun to stand still so he could win a battle and finish it off. Jehoshaphat being surrounded by an army and doesn't have any explanation to do it, and God says, just go out and sing, worship, and they do, and the people get confused and they go against themselves, and they never had to lift a sword or anything to fight a battle. These are all supernatural things. I mean, Joshua walking around with the Israelites, the walls of Jericho for 6 days, and on the 7th day they walk around 7 times, blast trumpets, and shout, and walls fall down.
Listen, I've shouted and yelled a whole lot, and I have not had walls fall down.
You know, let's talk about the life of Elijah.
You have the causing of droughts.
Yeah.
He was fed by the ravens.
Crazy.
He had flour, and he caused in the widow flour and oil to never run out.
Right.
He raised the dead. He called fire from heaven, caused it to rain, parted the Jordan River, and is taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. Yeah. Mic drop.
Yeah. And then the guy who came after him, Elisha, what did he do?
He also parted the Jordan on his way back, I might add. He healed poisoned waters. So another widow, he blessed her with the miracle of oil.
Because she didn't have money, and debtors were coming to take her kids, and so she had the miracle of oil and selling that.
You have telling a woman who was barren that she would have a son, and she did.
Yep.
He also raised the dead. You have the story of the floating axe head.
Yeah, that doesn't... an axe head that should float down to the bottom, he calls it to float to the top.
Wild. You have another man raised from the dead.
Why, though?
Because he touched the bones of Elisha.
He was dead, and you know, there was a raiders coming, and so they threw that. They were doing a funeral, and they threw him into the cave, and he touched the bones of Elisha and came back to life. You know, and so, but that's not. It didn't just stop in the Old Testament. It continued in the New Testament as well. You have Jesus feeding the 5,000 plus women and children with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. You have Jesus also, another story of him feeding 4,000 with a small amount of food. Jesus walked on water. I mean, you talk about outside of the natural realm, the water had to become firm to do it. Peter walked on water. Why? He kept his eyes on Jesus. And then when he took them off, he had a problem. Jesus calming a storm. Just saying, peace, be still, and it happening. And the Bible tells us that both Stephen and Philip operated in miracles. And so these are examples there. We talked about last episode about the gift of faith rising up to cast out demons. Well, I think the casting out of demons, there's no natural explanation for that. You can't counsel them out or talk. I mean, when that's happening, Paul striking Elymas blind. I don't know if I pronounced his name right, but close enough. And then we also talked about the raising of Tabitha from the dead. Or again, if that's named wrong. So there has that. So we talked about, you talked about on the last episode, I think, or maybe it was 2 episodes ago, whatever, about legs or body parts growing back in. And we have a story from Smith Wigglesworth who actually saw this, where the gift of faith and the working of miracles happened. So why don't you read that?
It says, Smith Wigglesworth stayed with a preacher who had no feet, just stumps. Wigglesworth instructed the man, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, go down to the shoe shop and buy yourself a brand new pair of shoes. The man recognized the power of God operating through Wigglesworth's life, so he didn't argue. The next morning at 8 o'clock, the minister made his way down to the shoe store on his crutches and told the clerk, I need a pair of shoes. He told him the size and the color that he wanted. The clerk looked at the man's stumps and started to say, but sir, and the minister said, don't, but give me the shoes. The clerk returned with the shoes. The minister took the first shoe, and as he put it over his wooden stump, flesh formed. The remainder of his leg formed, and a foot was created. Then he took the other shoe, and his other leg was lengthened, and a foot was added. He went to get new shoes, and he got new feet. Wigglesworth spoke that by the gift of faith.
Which then turned into the gift of miracles, or the working of miracle, where you see, again, these two operating in that. So you say, well, I don't know if I believe that. Okay, well, just recently, in the beginning,
last month.
Yeah, at the beginning of 2025, I prayed for a young man. Now, I don't fully know what happened, but I can tell you what I do know happened. And I know that he had to have ribs removed because of something in there, and that was successful. Unfortunately, it caved in because there were no ribs there, and so began to pray for him. And I literally felt as the indentation began to push my hand out, so much so that I told his mom, I said, put your hand there, and she began to weep because she noticed the difference. He went like this on both of them, and he could tell the difference as well. Did it fully happen? I don't know what all happened, but I'm telling you, there's no natural explanation for God to begin to restore those ribs and everything else. We have the story of the young man who was 6 years old at the time under our tent, and no explanation for this. He had autism, is what they had diagnosed him with. He had a 6'2", 6'3" principal as a 6-year-old and cornered him. The principal was scared to death, had to call his grandmother because that was who is watching him and taking care of him. Yeah. And the week before we came, she locked herself in a closet.
The grandma did.
The grandma did, crying out to God, saying, "We really need help." And that he had, as a 6-year-old, they're pastors and taking care of their grandkids, and he had never been able to make it through a full service, and had been pretty disruptive. Wasn't doing very good in school. Was very disruptive there, obviously from the story.
He was at a special school as well.
With the principal. And that first night, he sat through the entire service under that tent, weeping, and God began to really do a work in him. He was not there the following night. He came back the next night. I'm going to tell you, just to be honest, as where my faith level was, I thought, well, we'll see if this really worked. Because, that was the first service he ever stayed through. No, he was there that night, the following night, and the next morning. He is now one of the best kids in the school system. He no longer, I don't think he's back in normal.
He's in normal school, and he's in the top of his class.
Doing great. 2 years later, that was a miracle. Nobody had to lay hands on him. God just did it out of the desperation of his grandma crying out for help. And I mean, he's a normal 8-year-old kid, don't get me wrong,
but he's
full of energy.
Amazing.
But it's just it's crazy. And so that was outside the normal bounds. Like there's no cure for autism in the natural realm.
Right.
But there is with God. I think we talked about Wonder, who has seen close to 100, if not 100, people with that. And so God works these miracles, and it is God's power and magnificence on display for the world to see. And so that is just a few that have happened. We've had other things happen. We've talked about legs growing out. Mm-hmm. We did have a man whose leg grew out 1.5 inches. There's no joke. We had it on camera. We I don't know how well it got it. We were trying to get it on camera, but you can say whatever you want. He knows what had happened. I mean, we've been in things where I've had people freak out because they're like, I can literally feel it growing. Now, does that happen every service? No, it doesn't happen every service. That was what was needed during those services, and it did it. So God works these miracles, and when that, like I said, we talked about the gift of faith. When that, it's just like, rise, boom, it's going to happen. There's no question. That gift of faith rise up in you. You have the confidence that God's going to do because you have these coupling together. Did the gift of faith rise up with the little boy with autism? No. It didn't. God just did that. God just worked a miracle. Maybe the gift of faith rise. It wasn't in us. Let's just put it that way. It could have been in his grandparents or whatever. But that is, miracles we have seen. We've seen more than that. We had another young boy, 2 years old, who had never spoken and had been pretty much told he had severe hearing loss, if not deaf altogether. And we prayed for him, and by the next week he started showing signs of hearing. And so about a month later, they took him back for an extensive hearing test, and they found his hearing to be perfect. He is now starting to communicate and doing things, but again, there was no explanation for that. God just supernaturally healed that little boy and brought a miracle into their lives. So that concludes our series on the gifts, the 9-part series on the gifts of the Holy Spirit. But I want to say this, because to operate in the gifts without the fruit can be dangerous.
100%.
And so starting on our very next episode, we're going to transition from the gifts to the fruit. And then we're going to start after that a 9-part series on the fruits of the Holy Spirit. But we're going to talk about how the gifts and the fruits are connected and also how they're disconnected. And that will be on the next episode of Faith Bombs. We want to thank you for joining us today for this episode of Faith Bombs.
If this message encouraged you, don't forget to like, comment, and share.
And also hit subscribe for more faith-filled content.